So in terms of learning needs analysis and training needs analysis, then what is it all about? Where do we start? And for me, the very start, the start of the story is a very important question, which I'm going to ask you all now. And I understand this can't feedback. However, feel free to do it in the Q&A. But when we talk about learning needs analysis, for me, the big question is, do you like cake? And yes, I'm going off on a total tangent here, but I will bring it back. So when you think about cake, if anybody has been watching the Great British Bake Off on Channel 4, or has watched it in the past, maybe you stopped watching it when Mary Berry left, and I can understand that. I was a bit of a Mary Berry fan. When we talk about baking cakes, everybody now knows the famous phrase from Mary Berry, you have to make sure your cake doesn't have a soggy bottom. But for me, a really good cake isn't just about something that doesn't have a soggy bottom. And sometimes I like a soggy bottom on a cake. I like it when it sticks to the paper. But for me, cake is a number of different elements. So when you're baking a cake, the first thing, or you're going to buy a cake in a shop, the first thing that you want to see is how it looks. So if you've ever been past the likes of any of those famous bakeries in Belfast, the cafe bakeries, I'm sure you know them. I'm not going to promote any because there's lovely bakeries all over Northern Ireland, not just in Belfast. Newry has a couple of lovely bakeries too. Everywhere has. But when you walk past the bakery, they always put the fancy cakes in the window. So as you're walking past, it's the cakes that catch your eye, the big fancy cakes. They always have those fake wedding cakes too, which is really misleading because you think, well, that looks lovely, but it's not actually real. So when you look at a cake, and especially if anybody has been married, one of the biggest things in terms of your centerpiece is this big fancy cake. So how the cake looks, how it's iced, how it's finished, the decoration on it is really, really important. That external, that outside piece is really, really important. And bakeries spend hours doing that and making sure that it meets the customer's needs and it looks really fancy and really flash. If you've been to any of your local supermarkets recently and walked down the bread aisle, they have masses of cakes, loads and loads of them, and they're made to look like lots of different things, like superheroes and you know, the children's cakes, especially in the shapes of unicorns and cupcakes and all sorts of stuff, really, really fancy. So that's one element of it. But the other elements when it comes to really good cake is the filling. What are you putting in the middle? Is it buttercream? Is it jam? What are you filling it with? Is there fresh cream? Is there fruit? What's the tasty middle bit that you're going to discover when you cut into it? And of course, as Mary Berry insists, it has to have a lovely crumb and no soggy bottom. So all of those things all come together to make a nice cake. Now, I don't care if you are a red velvet fan, if you're a chocolate fudge cake fan, if you are a Victoria Sponge, a traditional Victoria Sponge fan. Any good cake has those three elements. It has the nice exterior, the icing on the outside, it has the fluffy sponge, and it also has that good filling that's holding everything, all those different elements together. Unless, of course, you come to my mum's and my mum serves you, would you like a slice of cake? And then she gives you this Daft Isle Madeira cake that is just literally a big whack of sponge. So that's not real cake. And I campaign hard to get my mother to buy a decent cake sometimes, but she's just not being convinced. So that's my personal issue. So when we talk about cake, it has to have those three. It has to have those three elements. Now, how does this relate to training needs analysis? On screen by now you've worked out that we're talking about three elements. We're talking about a cake. I very much think in the case of training needs analysis that it completely maps over onto cake. And I'm going to take you through that now. If you think of the three elements of cake, the icing, the filling, and the sponge, there's three elements to training needs analysis if you're going to do it right. And those three elements are the organizational needs. That for me is the icing, the shiny exterior, the bit that catches your eye. Organizational needs stage is looking at what are the big strategic things in our business that we need to be doing. What are our big aims, our big objectives? Where's our future? What are our headline projects and our headline products? Because this is the bit that when we think of our organization, this is what we're known for, and this is what we're famous for, and this is what we want to be. Our vision is to be the best providers of. So in your learning needs analysis and in your training needs analysis and in your training plan and that comes out of the back of it, you need to be making sure that the skills that you're putting in your business are those skills that are going to be used when it comes to growing, building, and foreseeing the vision of your organization and making that a reality. if you think then about the cream in the middle of the cake or the filling in the cake that's holding the different elements together, for me, this is the task analysis piece. Now, from my experience, what I've found is a lot of organizations just do this bit. The task analysis is kind of putting in place those measures of what people do, how they do it, and how good they are at doing it in terms of the measured outcomes. And for a lot of organizations, that's as far as they go when it comes to learning needs analysis. However, that is only one element. So that might be holding things together for now, but if you only focus on that long term, you're not actually getting the overall strategic aims and objectives of your business achieved. And come to the last element, making sure that there is no soggy bottom and making sure that we please everybody in our organization. We need to make sure that we look at the individual needs. Now, again, from my experience, this is one of the things that always got forgotten or was never seen as being just as important as the other elements. But the individual needs looks at your plan and looks at the people in your organization to make sure that there is almost something for everyone. Now, I'm not saying you've got to write a training plan that suits every single person in your organization, but there's got to be elements in there that give people in your organization that ability to cross-skill, upskill, and where there is a desire for people to stay in your organization and grow with your organization, that there is some element in that of growth for your staff and your people. So there's opportunities. There's hooks that are going to keep them there and make them stay in your organization to achieve their overall career objectives. Because let's face it, without that, people will stay for as long as the business is meeting their needs in terms of paying them a wage. But if you want people to stay there long term, if you want to have that really true, deep culture of learning, then you need to make sure that you're actually talking to people about what it is they want to achieve and what it is that's keeping them in your organization, and then how you build on that and how you create that learning culture going forward is really, really important. We're going to go through each of these in turn. And as we go through them, I'm going to give you some guidance in terms of why it's important, but I'm also going to give you some guidance in terms of the different tools and techniques that you can use to do that. So looking at the organizational needs, I realize that for most organizations, you have your own processes and your own methods at the minute of looking at your business performance and how your business is actually doing. So I'm not going to tell you to do something completely different from what you're already doing. What I'm going to try and do is give you ideas that you could actually use, suggestions you could actually use in terms of driving those organizational needs. But in doing what you already do. So pulling out some of the stuff that you're already doing and using it then to fulfill that's part of the learning needs and training needs analysis stage. So in terms of organizational needs, what it actually is then is looking at the global view of training needs in your business. So almost stepping outside of your role in HR, learning development or operational management and looking at the organization as a whole so that you're not just focusing on one key area. And what we're going to try and do then is look at the different areas of need for each of those different areas of the business and gather them together in one heap so that we can then start looking at what are our priorities, where do we need to be going to, what's the urgent things, what are the non-urgent things, and we can then decide on the strategic approach to the training going forward based on that. So this can be very, very vast. So what I've tried to do is break it down into 3 key areas which are listed here for you. The first one being future skill needs. So without a crystal ball, and approaching the likes of your senior management team, your key decision makers, your product development people, your R&D people, your key decision makers. What are the changes that are coming into your business that you're going to have to face going forwards that are going to be impactful to your organization, that people are going to need new skills, new knowledge, and be able to deal with in the future. So for me, that's a couple of things. Changes in products. What is going to happen to your products or your services going forward? One of the biggest shifts that we've seen this year throughout COVID is the complete shift away from in-office working to remote working. So everybody across the country, up and down the country, across the world, has had to come up with solutions to get their teams to manage and carry out business as usual from other areas, from either from home or from restricted premises and restricted access into premises. So in terms of changes to products or services, have you had to go into, let's say, online sales as opposed to face-to-face sales? Have you had to create delivery methods for your customers that will be different to the norm? So rather than having people come to your premises, have you had to then deliver your services or your products into people's homes or into people's organizations in completely different ways? What about the products that you're actually using in terms of delivering your service? So for the likes of any consultation businesses or businesses where you would normally meet people and talk to people face to face, have you actually had to change your delivery methods, your approach to that in order to fulfill the needs of your customers in the COVID period? But also then what's that going to mean for your products going forward? So where traditionally people would have been, let's say, getting groceries, because we've all been affected by the shortages in shops and reduced access into shops. The likes of all the big supermarkets have had to completely pivot their business to provide more support for customers in terms of online ordering, click and collect, as well as delivery to your doorstep. So they've really had to pump lots of resource into making their businesses more accessible when it comes to the different customer needs. What has it meant for your products? What has it meant for you? So is there an opportunity for you to grow certain products because of the crisis that we're in, or the crisis that we're going to face going forward, or the changes perhaps to Brexit? Tagged onto the back of the Brexit advert on TV last night. I happened to catch the next advert. I never usually watch the adverts, but the next advert after it was an advert for an online service that is automating customs requests, the customs declarations. Now I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but if you're really stuck, I'm sure Invest and I could we could get you the details of somebody that can provide you some similar here in Northern Ireland. But what I noticed was that this is a company that has purely just seen a need and created a product then that's going to fulfill those needs. So in terms of your products and your services for businesses and customers going forward, what are the new things that you're going to do to stay relevant, to stay on trend, to stay up to date? And with those changes in products, then what is going to happen to the equipment that you use? So in terms of your plant or your machinery, what are the big things that are going to be impactful going forward? What are the big things that you're planning on changing going forward? I know that at the minute there's a big drive towards lowering carbon footprint and a more green economy. And because of that, what we're seeing in a lot of our client companies is that they're moving towards manufacturing and processing that is more carbon neutral or less carbon using. So is that having an impact on your organization? Are you going to have to change your equipment to become greener? Also, in terms of the equipment that you currently use, you might have printing presses or cutting presses or equipment in your organization that you've had from the start of time. Are they coming to the end of their life? Are they going to have to be upgraded? Because this is something that organizations tend to think of in terms of their ongoing plant maintenance. We would like to be able to maintain the same plant and the same skills and use them forever. However, that just isn't the case. And as the world changes and technology changes and things move at a quicker pace, we're finding a lot of organizations are spending more time actually looking at putting the right equipment in place to future-proof their organizations. So what is that going to mean for you? I'm eternally fascinated by 3D printing, and it's basically because I remember when I was a child, completely giving my age away here, but when I remember as a child watching Tomorrow's World and Maggie Philbin doing a report on the future of printing. And at that stage, it was an idea around 3D printing, and it was very, very much being trialed. And this wasn't 100 years ago. I might sound old, but I'm actually not. But when I was a child looking at that, and I remember them saying at the time that you could go to a catalogue and order a piece of furniture or a piece of equipment for your home, and then they would send you the blueprint and you would print it out at home using a 3D printer. And I remember being completely fascinated and thinking that'll never happen, no way. But this was back when I was a kid, probably in the sort of, I'm going to be kind to myself and say early 80s. When even in school, there was probably only one or two printers. So, and again, nowhere near the technologies that we have now. They were very slow and clunky. So in terms of the changes in technology and equipment, the world is moving at the fastest pace it ever has. Change is happening at its fastest rate. So when we look at the equipment and the technologies that we're using, what is changing? What's going to be impactful for your organization? And what's going to lower your costs as well? Technology, there's another point again, highlighting the issue here. If you have a mobile phone, and this is very relevant at the minute because Investa and I, we've had to refresh our phones. They've gone past their serviceable age. So we've all been sent out new phones. And one of the things that it's highlighted is within our teams, there's such a disparity in terms of those people who are really, really good with technology and those people who really, really aren't. But even when it comes to technology, we all have to upgrade our phones. If you have an Apple, you'll get those regular updates telling you to upgrade the iOS version on your phone for security. So we all go through those times when you have to hit that button and wait for it to install and upgrade and stand for the next 20 minutes with your fingers crossed, hoping that that little icon appears back on the screen and you haven't lost everything. So in terms of technology, we're forced into change. We're forced to actually upgrade and change as the world around us changes, even if it's only just to keep us secure and safe. So with the likes of cyber risk, with the likes of changing technologies, what is it that you need to be training your people on, or what is it that they need to be able to upgrade their knowledge in order to keep up with the changes that are going on within the serviceable parts of your organization? And as I say, with one of the things that's been highlighted from Invest in upgrading their phones is that we've seen that there are some people, as I say, really good with it and find it really intuitive. Will automatically just click the right things because they're used to doing this. And then there are the other people like me, the technophobes, who absolutely panic if they're asked to do something and the step-by-step instructions read something even slightly wrong or slightly different from what it says on my screen. So you will have different levels of people in your organization that you need to bring along to this. So when it comes to changing technology, remember that any technical change in your organization is going to mean a learning or knowledge change for the people within your organization. The last two elements here then around future skills. The first one looks here, the changes to your team, and time doesn't stop for anybody. We are all unfortunately getting older day by day, but when you look at your team, have you got a team of people in your organization that are moving towards the latter stage of their career or in the latter stage of their career? Are you working with people in your organization who are already actively thinking about their escape, their end of term strategy in terms of getting out of your organization and enjoying their retirement? Or maybe you're at the other end, maybe you've got people in your organization who are coming in straight from education or coming in quite early in their career, and their aim in your organization is to build their CV, get as much experience, knowledge, training as they can, and then move on to the next stage in their career. Hopefully you'll have a blend of all of those, but are you aware of your team and your team changes and what's going to happen in your team going forward? Because if you're not actually aware, you can be hit with those unwelcome surprises, like Charlie the van driver just decides that he's going to take his retirement and he hands his notice in, and you suddenly realize, gosh, we've nobody else in our organization that can operate the forklift and load the van like Charlie does, and we're going to be left with either having to recruit somebody at pretty short notice or having to train somebody up and actually get them licensed in that. Now, that would be quite a simple change to overcome, because you could very quickly find that training and put those skills in place in your organization, hopefully. However, if you're talking about somebody who's in a leader position or somebody who's been in your organization for a long period of time and has not just those hard skills that they use all day, every day in their job, but all of that background knowledge goes with that. You know, the kind of intimate knowledge of your organization and how things work and why they work like that. And that isn't so easy to replace. So are we looking at our team? Are we looking at our people in our organization? And are we making sure that we're bringing new, dare I say, younger people, because it's not always younger people in your organization, but are you bringing in new people and shifting around and changing where your skill set so that there's a good spread across the organization, and that you'll never be left at a time when somebody decides to either leave your organization or, gosh, hopefully not, but if somebody takes ill and is out of your organization for a long period of time, are you making sure that all those different avenues of expertise and knowledge are actually covered? The last one, we've already hinted at already, environmental changes, looking at what's changing around you, the things that we have no control over. Again, mentioning Brexit here, but it's probably one of the biggest changes that's going to affect us in the next, I'm going to say, well, it's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 months, but when we look at the period further down the line, we're talking about Brexit and its impact over the next 1, 2, 3, even up to 5, 6 years. We don't know just how long we're going to be feeling the aftershocks and the changes from it. So what are the big environmental things that are going to be impacting on your organization? The green production and being aware of your carbon footprint is one of the things that organisations have been looking at for a while. But what are the other things that have come along behind it? What's going to be the next big thing that people are talking about? And is it going to be a change that's going to be impacting on your organisation, or is it going to impact your customers? Because if it's impacting your customers, then you're going to need to be aware of it too. So making sure that we've got a level of analysis that we're looking in our organisation at what we're going to need for the future. The other facet then, as I said, there was 3 future skills. The first one, looking at the labour pool. So have you got anybody in your organisation or people in your organisation that are looking around where you're sitting in terms of your geography and looking at the availability of a qualified workforce? Now, most of us will rely on the likes of job centres or schools and universities to tell us what is coming out the door, and very often your main contact with the local schools and universities is going to be when they come to you asking for work placement or work shadowing opportunities for their students. But are you building that relationship on an ongoing basis so that you know what young people in your area are being skilled and trained in? So that you know as they come out of schools and universities and colleges, if you have roles that they can potentially fulfill and opportunities for them? Or are you relying on the workforce around you, the people around you to come in with zero skill and zero knowledge, and upskilling with all those specialisms? Because that then is going to mean that your induction and your initial training then is going to be a very heavy onus on you in terms of getting that right, but also in terms of providing all the education then that your staff need going forward. And yes, that happens in specialisms all the time. But are you talking to education providers around you to ask and promote those key skills that you need, even if they're not hard skills in terms of scientific or hands-on skills, but maybe there are softer skills that schools can be looking at, maybe the customer service side, maybe the question and answer skills, maybe it's the interrogation skills, maybe it's problem solving skills. Are you talking to education around you and those education providers around you, even the training providers around you, to see that they're keeping up with those areas that you're going to need people to have as you recruit them into your organisation? And with that as well, then we talk about looking at the individual needs, and this is where it kind of crosses over ever so slightly. But when you talk about labour pool, who is it in your organisation? Is there someone in your organisation that's looking at availability of upskilling, cross-skilling? It's looking at where your product flows throughout your organisation or your service flows throughout your organisation, looking for the bottlenecks, looking for the times that things slip, looking at the faults, looking at the complaints, but looking to see where you need to be adding in skills or boosting skills, or where skills maybe would have been traditionally highly used that are now in lower use, and where there's maybe a bit of availability in your organisation for people to be cross-skilled on other areas. So what's actually happening for the labour pool within your organisation, and how do we then tap into the skill needs that come out of that as a result? And the last area then, again, hinted this before as well, but when we look at the statutory changes in terms of what's happening around us, some of it's going to be environmental, some of it's going to be more wider ranging, but looking at things that are going to affect us in terms of the incoming changes in law. Very often we hear about these things through our providers, our external providers, or through our external recruitment organisations, or whatever it might be. But it's more beneficial to your organisation to actually have people in it that are looking out for and researching and doing a bit of a sideline project looking at what is going to be impacting us going forward. And again, Brexit is going to have massive impacts for every organisation, regardless of shape and size, because it's going to actually impact how we even go about recruiting people from outside of the UK. So everybody needs to be aware of those changes in law. Who is it in your organisation that's doing that? And can they feed that then into our learning needs so that we have a really good plan to get our recruitment teams even and our team leaders and team managers and organisations management up to spec so that they know exactly what those changes are going to be and how they're going to impact on them. And then again, the industry specification and standards. And this is an area probably that's going to have massive ramifications based on what's happening at the minute with coronavirus, because while we talk about industry specifications and standards, probably if you think about one of the most highly standardized areas and with the greatest amount of standards, it would be hospitalities and the likes of our food prep and our food production side of businesses here. But while there are already hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different specs and standards for food production, what we're seeing going forward now is that based on the fact that coronavirus was so contagious and was so easily spread, we now have different industries that are performing their business in totally different ways to make sure that that spread is reduced. Social distancing is going to be in place for a long time. Now, I'm not the expert on it, so I'm not going to try and specify how long it's going to be, but it's probably going to become part of life going forward, and that's very much the message that we're getting from government. So in terms of the statutory changes for your organisation, you now need to look at what you do and how you do it and make sure that that becomes business as usual for your organisation. So looking at your industry specs, you're probably going to find quite a bit of change going forward on that. So rather than reacting to it when it becomes a required standard, are we as an organisation taking time out to look forward and say what could be coming about, what might be coming about, and how we need to then deal with that. So that is what organisational needs actually looks like. Normally what we would do in a live workshop at this stage is come up with some of the sources that we would use that are going to help us understand where these future needs are going to lie. And I provide you, when you get the pack that goes along with today's webinar, it'll have all the slides in it and it'll have all the resources in it. And one of the things that'll be in it is a list of resources in terms of source organizations and websites that you can go to that will help you start to formulate your organizational needs. But for me, some of the key areas you need to be looking at in terms of your future skills and looking at changes in products and services and equipment, talking to, first of all, your supply chain. You will already have people probably in your organization that supply you with your IT, your plant, your technology, and very much having a good relationship with them is going to help you understand what they see as being the changes going forward. If they're providing you with equipment, they're going to know what the future of that equipment is going to look like. So getting your sales reps to come out and talk to your organization regularly so that you can understand what those changes are going to be is going to be really important. But also we're looking at the likes of the industry around you, talking to your industry bodies, becoming active in your local chambers and you know, even if you don't attend every meeting, sign up for their e-zines, sign up for their online magazines, and get as much information as you can going forward. And when you sign up for all these different bodies, different organizations to send you information, just a key tip here, don't have it all coming into your individual inbox because you literally get updates on a daily basis. So make life easy for yourself. Set up a little inbox that's just for organizational needs or training needs analysis. Use that inbox then to sign up for all these e-zines and online information that's going to be sent out. And then as you get time to sit down and look through those organizational needs and do that bit of research, you can then go through that inbox, delete what you don't need, keep what's important, and get the key points out of it. So that you're really diluting that information as it comes into your organization and refine it right down to what it is you actually need to know. But others than doing desk research, in terms of organizational needs, getting out there and talking to those key people in your organization and outside of your organization is really, really important, however you do that. I realize that right now face-to-face meetings are very much not happening for a lot of people, and that's understandable, but can you do regular check-ins via, you know, the likes of your technology, your Zooms and webinars and Microsoft Teams, whatever technology you choose to use. But it's keeping up that contact and making sure that you retain that contact with those outside bodies that can actually give you this information, give you this knowledge. Also within your organization, then it's making sure that you have that network in your organization that's kept alive, getting involved in those executive meetings or those decision making sessions or those future planning sessions, and making sure that L&D, however it's represented either through HR or through learning and development, actually has a place at that table, so that you're not just inputting what we've done and what we're doing going forward, but that you're actually getting the information in terms of the key decisions being made by the business as well. Now, from my experience, it's sometimes quite difficult to get your L&D people actually into that forum, but if you put that request in now, if you start asking the questions of your senior team, you will find more than likely what they'll do is either send you the minutes or invite you along to those meetings. But it's about you now changing from being the L&D provider to now having that seat at that top table, those decision makers. And if you're not getting into those meetings, then set up a meeting of your own and go and approach those decision makers and start asking them these questions. What's going to change in terms of our products? What's going to change in terms of our equipment? Because I need to know these things in order to be able to provide really good skills and training and learning going forward. So Again, in terms of organizational needs, there's lots of different ways we can be doing it. I'm going to talk about more as we go through, but you've got the pest analysis and SWOT analysis that will be already in your business plan going forward. Even having access to your business plan is a key thing here, your strategic plan or your strategic business plan going forward. So again, trying to get into your organization to understand where that sits and how that sits. It's going to be individual to each of you, but if you're struggling with this or if you have issues with this going forward, give us a shout, because we have lots of resources within InvestNI that could potentially help you looking at your organisation and looking at your products and services going forward. I know that InvestNI at the minute, our office is closed down. However, we are all still working away behind the scenes, I promise. So if you do have questions or there's research that you need carried out, don't forget that we have our business support library. It was traditionally based in the ground floor in InvestNI, and you could have booked an appointment. You can still call our business inquiry line, our 0800 number, and that's 0800 181 4422. I'll give that number out again at the end. But you can still call and request any business support in terms of research or assets that you need going forward, in terms of looking at local businesses and what they're doing, what your competitors are doing, and what the market's doing, and all that sort of stuff. So we can help you with that research as need to be going forward. So again, just to reiterate, you're not on your own. If you're struggling with this stage, please get in touch, okay? And as I say, contact details, I'll give you all those at the end again. But this is the organizational needs. This is the icing on the cake. And sometimes people think this should be the last stage that you do. I like to try and do this first, because it will very much guide conversation as you go through to the next level. And I'm going to talk about the next level now. In terms of the next level then down, if you remember, we're going now looking at the filling in the cake, the buttercream or the chocolate filling in your cake. So the task analysis piece then looks at what people do in your organization and how they actually do it. So we're now getting into the nitty-gritty of what people do, looking at job requirements, looking at the outputs that are required from your employees, and comparing where their skills currently sit to where we need them to sit going forward. So we're looking at employee skills and knowledge to identify skill gaps. Now, in my experience, and even having sat in on other sessions, there was a masterclass recently with one of the councils. This was very much done by looking at KPIs and measures and outputs. And that would be lovely if you have all those. So establishing task frequency, quantity, and quality would be a lovely place to start with it. Easy if you're talking about somebody who's in production, or somebody who provides a service, or standing at the front of your organization signing people in and out. And you can look at what they're doing, how they actually do it, and making sure they're effective and efficient at doing that. But where there are jobs that don't have those set measures, it becomes ever so difficult for a lot of people. So it's looking at not just ticking boxes in terms of those key measures, but also looking at the levels of skill and knowledge required for each role going forward. And that might be skills and knowledge around operating a machine and timing, how quickly they can reset a machine or set up a machine. But looking at the other areas of the business, what about the people that are managing those people that are managing that machine? So what are their key performance indicators? What are their key measures? What are you asking them to actually do for your organization, and how do they prove they're actually doing it? So it might be KPIs, it might be success indicators in terms of financial controls, or time controls, or meeting key milestones, or managing projects going forward. So what are the key things that you want people in your organization to be able to do? And then we're going to try and determine where and how these skills are best acquired. Now, this isn't jumping forward into planning out what training we're going to actually input and how we're going to do it. This is basically looking at, do we have a level of skill already in our organization? And if we are completely void of a certain skill set, we're going to have to go externally to get that. But if we have skills and knowledge and expertise, especially that expertise internally, how do we share that? And how do we share that internally? Because if somebody's sitting in an organization who is brilliant at using a particular piece of kit or a particular piece of technology, why do we have to go outside? We don't. We can just use that person internally to pass their skill on. Now, that might mean a totally different learning need for that individual. That might mean, rather than getting them technical skills, we maybe need to get them trainer skills, or some mentoring skills, or some feedback skills, or maybe it's a more behavioral piece. Maybe it's something around their communication skills. So we're going to look at totally different set of needs there. But the task analysis piece is very much about looking at what people actually do within their roles. Now, when we talk about task analysis, in the live workshops, we would have talked about examples from other organizations that have actually done this. And one of the organizations that we talked about doing this was one of the big European breweries. And what they actually did was they got an external company to come in and look at different components of people's jobs within the brewery, and then look at how they actually performed a problem-solving exercise around that. So they set up the actual job, they set up components from the piece of equipment that these teams would have worked with, and they put in like a fake fault, and had the people that were doing this role identify where that fault was. And what they looked for was whether or not the people doing that actually complied with the training that they had already received. So looking at whether or not they stuck to the service level agreement, and whether or not they stuck to the key sort of training indicators that they'd been trained in. And they had key processes that they were looking for compliance with. Now, if you are an organization that is that well structured, that you have all of those processes in place, and that would be quite an easy thing to measure. And it's great if you do. And you'll probably find in your organization that you've got some way of measuring how people do and what their outputs actually are. But rather than getting stuck on that, looking at adherence to processes, where you don't have processes, what you're going to need to do then is look at the outputs. So look at the things that are coming out from your organization. And again, harken back to those key measures that we talked about at the start: faults, bottlenecks, and complaints. You might find in your organization that one of the biggest indicators to your outputs is on-time delivery to your customers of whatever product that you're actually producing. You may find that it is customer satisfaction. And let's face it, nowadays, almost every organization is measuring customer satisfaction. So where do you do that? How is that currently done? So I'm not going to ask you to go away and create a whole new set of measures. I'm going to ask you to go back to your organizations and talk to the key people that manage the different parts of your organization, and try and get from them what those success measures actually are and how they're changing going forward. So if we have people in our organization that are focused on delivery to our customers, what are the key measures for that? How do we demonstrate that we're actually good at that? And what do we do when it goes wrong? And where then what are the things that are going wrong, and how do we then start to correct that? So if you've never measured complaints in the past, now is the right time to start doing that. If you've never measured delivery to your customer satisfaction, maybe now is the right time to do that. But if you have a need for looking at new measures or changing your measures, or maybe you're sitting going, oh, please, Maeve, don't ask me to do this. I haven't got a clue what our measures are. Don't have a panic. Please get in touch and we'll help you establish what those are, and we'll come up with ideas around that for you. We would encourage you very much to get involved after this webinar, because there's lots of services available to you. As a skills advisor, I don't mind coming out to your organisation and sitting down with you and talking, obviously socially distant and in the safest way possible. But I will sit and talk with you and discuss with you how to make this happen in your organisation. And very often when we go out and we start talking about how your organisation currently works, there's already stuff being done that you can tap into. And if not, we can come up with and brainstorm some ideas to how to make this happen going forward. So please don't panic. And again, as I say, there's other ideas that we'll talk about in the next couple of slides around how to do this. In the organisations that I've worked in the past, they've done the likes of assessment centres, and they've used different methods to actually do this. So in some organizations, it's a case of looking at job specs and then comparing the outputs on the job spec with the outputs in real life. Some organizations do it by doing assessment centers. And as I say, the brewery did an assessment center by getting people regularly to come in and do little tests, and then feeding back the outputs from those tests, the learning from those tests. But another key thing, and that's relatively low cost, is actually getting in and doing observations or observe and coach within your organization. So getting out managers, either yourself as the person who's going to be doing the training needs, or more useful, somebody who knows what the outputs, what the services are that you're providing, and has a level of expertise in that, and get them to actually sit and watch those people who are delivered in your organization from a distance or up close, or sitting side by side. And actually being able to identify what has gone well, what hasn't gone well, and what needs to change going forward. So again, there's a wide range of ways that you can actually do this, and we're not going to leave you abandoned. As I said, there's plenty of support available to you. And if you need somebody to come out and talk to you, or somebody to remotely talk to you, or somebody just to give you a phone call and stay right away from you, we'll provide you with whatever service it is you want. So don't be worried about that. But the key thing is to get into your organization, look at what people are actually doing, how they're doing it, and whether or not they're actually doing it to the standard or the level or the depth that you actually need them to be doing. Because no matter how well you train people when they join your organization, learners in your organization, the people in your organization will very much either revert back to habit, revert back to how they were taught originally, or how they learned this whenever they first joined your organization, or they revert back to what they learned when they were in school or what they learned when they were in college. And sometimes that isn't always up to date. So I'm going to take you through a wee model here that just shows you what I actually mean by that, because we tend to assume that we train people and they're just going to do it the way we train them. It's not always the case. In fact, it's almost never the case. And not to be disheartening about putting training in place in your organization, but this highlights the need for ongoing learning, ongoing development, and also ongoing measurement of what the learning gaps are in your organization. So some of you might be familiar with this, some of you might have already come across this before, the conscious competence model. And this, for me, when I first came across this a vast number of years ago, I don't want to tell you how many and give my age away, but when I, obviously not as far back as Maggie Phil, but I'm not that old. But when I first came across this, to me, that was when the penny dropped when it comes to the need for ongoing training. And it has stuck with me ever since, and it's so, so important. But in terms of the conscious competence model, I'm going to explain it to you using my experience of learning to drive. Because I think it kind of explains the model well. So there's 4 stages of the conscious competence model. And the conscious competence model looks at consciousness in terms of how aware you are of something, and also competence in terms of how skilled or how able you are to do something. So this applies to everybody doing everything in your organization. This applies to every human being doing every action that they carry out, and carrying every skill that they have to carry out in life, whether that is cooking dinner or driving their car or doing your end of month reports or providing customer service assistance to your customers. So it applies to absolutely everything. So the 4 stages that we move through are unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious competence, and then back sometimes into unconscious incompetence. But let me just explain them to you. So when we think about learning to drive, probably most people nowadays drive. There's very few people that don't, and if you don't drive, then hopefully this will still make sense to you, because it's very relatable. But when I look back to learning to drive, to me this was the most obvious example of these different stages. So when I first thought about learning to drive, I was in my early 20s, and I wanted to learn to drive for a number of reasons. Number one was I was sick and tired of having to wait on my family to give me lifts places. So you know, when you get that stage in your life when your social circle has expanded to different people from different areas, and not just your school friends that live in your neighborhood. I was always having to wait and ask my dad or my big brother to give me lifts to different places, and I always felt like I kind of owed them something, or I was putting them out. So I really wanted to learn to drive to be a wee bit more independent. And the other big driver for me in terms of wanting to learn to drive was when I was looking for jobs, I was very limited to where I could get to on the local bus route, which was literally just as it is in Belfast, in and out of Belfast city centre. And it was even worse back when I was in my 20s, which was obviously not that long ago. So I really, really wanted to learn to drive, and I decided, sitting in the bar one night with my mates, and I said, I want to learn to drive. I think it's time I learned to drive. And one of my friends had recently qualified as a driving instructor, and he said, tell you what, Maeve, if you want to learn to drive, I'll do you a wee deal. I'll give you your first 10 lessons for £100. And a bargain, even in those days. So I remember thinking, it can't be that hard. Like, it's a couple of pedals and a steering wheel. Right? How hard could it be? And I had this discussion with my friend at the time, saying, I don't think I'm going to need 10 lessons, you know, because I mean, I've been watching people doing it for years. I'm sure it can't be that difficult. It was 5. And he said, I'll tell you what, just pay for the 10. And if you only need 5, I'll give you half the money back. And we'll give it back to you in a pro rata basis. But I would advise you to do at least 10 to start off with. So I thought, all right, then I might as well. So paid him for the 10 lessons, booked my first lesson in, and he arrived at the door to pick me up on the day of my first lesson. And took me in the car to a big car park, mainly unused car park, and we parked up in the corner of the car park. And he got out of the car and said, "Well, you said bits and bobs about driving, so we're going to swap seats. You get in the driver's seat and carry out your cockpit checks, and then we'll get ready to do a bit of driving practice." And at that point, I suddenly realized that I, in fact, am not the expert on driving that I thought I was, because I hadn't a clue what he meant by cockpit checks. Now, for anybody like me who learned to drive a long time ago, just to revise you on it, your cockpit checks are those things that you do before you start your engine when you get into your car, which we all do every day, of course. Things like making sure your seat is in the right position, that you can, operate the pedals without stretching too far, or in fact not putting the clutch the entire way in. Things like making sure that your wing mirrors are correctly positioned, that you can see all around the car, that your rear view mirrors in the right position, that you've got good vision out the back of the car, making sure obviously that there's no warning lights come on your dashboard when you put the keys in. All those things that we do all day, every day before we go, making sure your tires are the right air pressure and all that nice, your window wipers all work, and you've got window wash. All those things that you do every day before you drive, or at least should do every day before you drive. Can't say I do them. But they are the key checks. Then obviously then putting your seatbelt in, making sure your seatbelt's correct, your seating position is correct, your headrest in the right position, all that stuff. So all of those things are actually your cockpit checks. And of course, little old me of sitting there in a first driving lesson hadn't a notion. So I actually had to ask, are you sure that there is such a thing as cockpit checks? Because this isn't actually a plane, this is a car. And at that stage, then my instructor had to talk me through all of these different checks. So I had no idea how to position wing mirrors. I had to even ask that question. How do you know you can see all around? I can't see out the back. Oh, that's what your rear view mirror's for. Oh, okay then. So that's how daft I was before I started drive. And then of course you start doing your first lesson and you're actually trying to achieve the purpose of your lesson, which is to get the car to move. I had no idea what a clutch did. Absolutely none. Not only did I know what the clutch did, I didn't know which one was the clutch. So you can imagine my first lesson at the end of it, after plenty of sweat and tears. I'd only actually managed to make the driving instructor's car move about a foot. And that was the point that I realized that I was completely incompetent. I had no competence at all when it came to driving. But within the space of my first lesson, I moved from the stage of unconscious incompetence, where I got into the car not knowing even what I needed to know, right through to becoming conscious of my incompetence. By the end of my first lesson, when he started talking to me about the cockpit checks, about maneuvers, about learning the different maneuvers that you need, reversing around a corner, parallel parking, oh, parallel parking still scares me, all of those key things, I suddenly, at the end of my first lesson, thought, I really truly don't need 10 lessons. I'm sure I need 100 lessons because I haven't got a notion. So unconscious incompetence is a bit where you don't know what you don't know. You're totally new to it, or you don't realize what it is that's involved in learning this particular skill set. Right through to becoming conscious of your incompetence, realizing what you need to learn, having a plan, or having some indicator that sets out to you what it is you're going to need to know to actually pick up this particular skill. So that was the end of the first lesson, and there was lots of crying done. And in fact, I think probably twice I told him that he could take my £100 and not come back. There's no way I was ever going to learn all of this. But we had a big conversation and I had a big chat with myself, and went back then and completed the series of 10 lessons. And then I had another 10 lessons, and I'm sure I had another 10 after that. So it was going on quite a while. I was doing one lesson a week, and I was in my first sort of full-time job. So I just more or less set up a direct debit straight to the driving instructor. And I think by the time I was ready to actually go for my test, I'm sure that I'd paid for his wedding and the deposit for his first house, and probably upgrading his car a couple of times too. But it took me a long time to get to a point driving, believe it or not, where I was actually able to do all the maneuvers um, well, or to a point that I was able to achieve them to the standard that was required. So this is the point where you've been doing your driving lessons and you know the test route. You know that your instructors tend to take you around the bits that they know you're going to come across on your driving test. And for me, that was the Balmoral driving route in Belfast. So all those little side streets off the Lisburn Road and the Malone Road, I became more than au fait with, and I could reverse around those corners, but don't ask me to do it anywhere else outside that route. I was very much able to drive and do what I was asked to do by my instructor. And that's where I knew I was consciously competent, because while I was doing those things, I was very, very conscious of doing them to the standard that I'd been taught. So I was reversing around a corner and using the little indicator in the middle of the rear windscreen as my guide. As soon as it was aligned with the curb on the passenger side, I knew then to start straightening the wheel up to make sure that I turned around the corner and kept tight to the corner. If parallel parking, I used the little indicator on the wing mirror and lined it up with the car behind. So when you're pulling into the parking space, as soon as you hit that wee line, you knew you had to turn your car, the driver's wheel the other direction to straighten the car up into the parking bay. And even as we're talking about it, I kind of have a wee bit of a sick feeling, because parallel parking for me was one of those things that took the longest to learn. It was just horrendous. And it's something that for a long time I avoided doing. So I knew that I was doing what I was doing because I was practicing all those little things that I'd been taught, and also constantly reciting to myself the words mirror, signal, maneuver every time I was driving. So when you get to that point that you're doing it and you're able to do it and you're conscious of what you're doing, you're thinking about what you're doing, that's the point that the driving instructor puts you in for your driving test. And back when I was doing it, they just brought in the theory test, so you had to do it and do your driving test as well. So all of these things you're learning from your book learning for your highway code, but you're also learning from the real life driving experience as well. And at that stage, then you've got to do the two parts of your test. Unbelievably, I passed my test first time. And oh, the joy, I can't even tell you. I cried. I think the examiner cried. Um, the driving instructor cried. My mummy cried. My daddy cried. Probably had the thoughts of having to put me on insurance. The dog cried. Everybody cried. Shared tears of joy, because it had taken me like a million years to actually get to that point of doing the test and learning everything. So I decided I was going to go off and buy my first car. I went down to Boucher Road course in Belfast, where else to buy a car. At that stage, biggest car area for buying it in Belfast. So off I hoofed it down to Boucher Road, so excited with my bank details. Bought a wee car in HP and decided that I would be picking it up. And they said I'm going to do a valet and give it a wee service and stuff, and I would be able to pick it up Friday the following week. And of course, I opted to pick it up on Friday afternoon in the middle of Boucher Road, and got my insurance and all set up, and my dad dropped me off and left me at the car showroom, excuse me, and that was me then picking up my new car. They gave me the keys, and at that stage the wee salesman just put me in a car and waved me off. So all of a sudden I found myself, the first time ever, sitting behind the wheel of a Renault Clio. I had no idea how to adjust the wing mirrors. I had no idea how to adjust the seat. I actually had to stop in the showroom and go back in and get the guy to come out and show me how to adjust my seat. I had no clue how to do it. So all of a sudden I was thrown back into this level of incompetence. This I hadn't expected to be completely clueless as to how to operate this car. So again, finding things like your indicators and the way the steering works and just how much you have to turn the steering wheel. It's different for every car, and holding your foot on the clutch and getting the biting point was a whole new thing. And I quickly learned that I had, of course, picked the wrong time to pick up a car, because let's face it, at 4 o'clock on a Friday in Boucher Road, it really is just a big slow moving car park. So I can't even tell you the sweat that was coming off me by the time I made it home. But I had gone from being consciously competent, knowing what I was doing and doing it to a good standard, to becoming, again, conscious of my incompetence, having to go back and learn this all over again. So I'd moved from level 3 back to level 2. So got the car home and learned how to use it and everything else, and started practicing driving around my area and around areas I was familiar with, and then taking little adventures to new areas and approaching different junctions and different roundabouts, and then of course doing your first time driving on a motorway and getting somebody to come with me and sit with me and guide me as I did that as well, and learning all those things that you learn just from doing. So no matter how much you learn when you're being trained, you learn so much more doing it on your own by yourself. Those things that you come across that you haven't come across before. are very much a learning period too. And very quickly, I found myself at level 4, which is unconscious competence. Very quickly from driving on your own and putting yourself out there and practicing, you find that you drive from A to B without actually thinking about what you're doing. So you stop saying mirror signal maneuver, and you stop using that little guide on your rear windscreen or your rear view mirror to guide you into parking spaces, and you start doing things out of practice and developing those skills that are independent of what you've learned. And that's when you know you've reached unconscious competence. You're able to do something without stopping to actually think about it. Now, traveling away, working away, driving a wee car, having a great time, thinking that I'm brilliant. It wasn't long before I then veered back into level 1, which is also level 5, because at the stage of unconscious incompetence, you can probably guess what happens when you're driving and you're unconsciously incompetent. You have either a near miss if you're lucky, or an accident. And mine was an accident, and the thankfully the only one time that I had an accident that I was actually um, aware of was the time that I drove the car and pulled out of a parking space and ended up actually hitting another car. So I had an accident, and I realized then that I needed to be very much aware of what I was doing and become more aware of what I was doing. And it throws you straight back into being aware of your incompetence, being aware of your incompetence, so becoming consciously incompetent. Now, what that demonstrates is that not only do we learn, but we need to learn on an ongoing basis, and we need to be reminded of things on an ongoing basis too. So from driving a car, you move from unconscious incompetence right back around through conscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious incompetence, and sometimes very much back into unconscious incompetence. And we do it as an ongoing basis. So when you think about driving, the government have different processes in place to keep you aware and keep you competent as you drive, whether it's the overhead gangs on motorways that pop up with warnings and flashing lights and traffic lights, whether it's the rumble strips on the road that remind you to become conscious when you're coming to a junction, or whether or not it's the road markings and changing road markings. But when you apply that then back into the workplace, it's not difficult to then see how when people are trained to do things or given a process to do things, if they do them on an ongoing regular basis over and over and over again, not only will people come up with their own shortcuts, but they'll start doing things their way to suit them, or they'll have shorthand ways of doing things to suit them. So when we apply this back to learning, it's obvious then in organizations we need to be focused on moving from people from unconscious incompetence, but keeping them conscious of what they're doing as they go ahead. So for our employees, the best places we could have them are those two levels of competence, conscious competence and unconscious competence, and moving them between the two by putting in refresher training. So when it comes to the task analysis piece, we're not just looking at those new skill areas, we're looking at existing skill areas and making sure that people maintain that level of skill that they need to have, that competence that they need to have for those roles. So this is why we need to do learn needs analysis, train needs analysis on an ongoing basis.